Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Jamie Buzzelle, the Repairent Coach. She is a certified parenting coach who works with parents of kids of all ages, and her approach focuses on connection and relationships. Our discussion will focus on how her challenging teenage years of feeling isolated and misunderstood led her into making these skills something for all parents to have access to. So, without further ado, let's jump right into our conversation. You're listening to today's leaders, from teens to titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Jamie.
Hello, Lorraine. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. All right. So, as a teen leadership coach,
Mm,
I want to empower teens to see themselves as leaders, but
hmm
that's often one of the biggest hurdles and therefore teens, don't know that we're leaders. So,
Yeah.
can you describe yourself as a teen and share
hmm
how you saw yourself as a teenager and how that helped you develop into the person that you are today?
Yeah. When I look back on my teen years, so I was an only child. So I was the only kiddo in my house, and I was a very compliant child leading up to teenage years. So I was the one that got all the good grades. I got all the, student is a pleasure to have in class. You didn't have to worry about me. You could take me anywhere and I would listen and never complain, never push buttons, never push against boundaries. When I started to obviously move into early adolescence and teen years, that started to shift a little bit. And that became a struggle for my parents. And I experienced a lot of shame. I experienced a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot of really over the top emotional reactions to what I have looked back on now as an adult was pretty normal teenage behaviors. And I think part of what ended up being a pretty convoluted journey to get me to where I am today as a coach is part of that experience. And when I look at teens today, I hear just constantly, that they have no respect and they're lazy, and teens are even worse today than they were when we were growing up. And I feel like every generation says that about our teens, right? I bet you if we even went back to the 50s, those parents would say, these teens today are so lazy and they don't appreciate anything. So I don't think that's anything new. I think the challenge with teens today obviously is social media, and that's a very different situation for them and a different mountain and hill that they have to climb. But in my own experience, I think when I became a parent, one of the things that I really wanted to do is not ever make my child feel like their behavior was who they were as a person. That was never separated for me. So when I would make a mistake, and I made some big ones. Listen, I got arrested for shoplifting when I was 14. Not a great choice. I totally own that. And that was a really big mistake, and I paid for it. And I can tell you that I learned from it, and I've never even considered doing it again from that day. But I mean, man, the magnitude with which my parents reacted to it, the verbiage that they used, the way that they treated me, the reactions that I got was never separated to who I was as a person. And there was a lot of that happened growing up where my behavior was never separated from who I was as a person. And so I, as an adult, very much have struggled around when I make a mistake, I'm bad and I swallow that whole. When I say something wrong, I swallow that whole. Rather than it right sizing to be, you're a good person that made a bad choice. You are a good friend who hurt someone's feelings. And so it really is important, I think, especially during this middle brain period where teens are having so much change in their lives and in their development and in their brain development, their characters being developed, their identities being developed, probably more so because they're getting cues from everybody around them, not just their parents, socially and everywhere. We have to be reinforcing their goodness. I think that's so important with teens. And it's something that was really amiss in my household. And listen, I get it. What you don't know, you don't know. And I don't think that my parents did it on purpose. They didn't have those tools. They just didn't know that what they were doing would cause damage. If they did, I totally trust that they wouldn't have done it that way. But now we know better. And so we need to do better.
It's so interesting that you talk about part of the transition and part of the realization of that impact that happened in your teenage years carried in and on was when you became a parent.
Yeah.
And I think as a former educator, classroom teacher, my awareness of my impact on kids' lives as a
Mhm.
teacher changed dramatically when I had my own children. And I have admitted that I am the kind of teacher who originally sent home homework because that's what you do. And
Mhm.
then I realized when I had my own children that home is a place to be home and not
Yeah.
continue doing work. And so it's so interesting for me to hear you say that and that you took on that role of coach that potentially was something that you needed at the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
And your parents could have fell into the role of coach for you, but
Mm.
instead they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the tools, so
Mhm.
they needed the coach to then become coach for you. And so it's
Mhm.
interesting that coach is the job that you chose. So
Yeah.
when you were a teenager, was
Mhm.
there somebody in your life that you felt helped you, mentored you, coached you through that to help you develop into a pretty normal person and not fall into that, like you went down the wrong path where you shoplift and then you got, further and further? Was there a mentor or a coach that helped you see that coaching could potentially be a solution? No.
That's the short answer. Nope.
Hmm.
I've actually lived on my own since I was 18. My parents moved back east. I live in the Pacific Northwest. And when I graduated, my dad had an opportunity with a company back. And so they moved. I elected to stay, and they wanted to leverage the power that they perceived that they had over me and said, well, if you want to go to school, if you want to pursue that, we will not help you if you stay put. You have to come with us. And I couldn't wait to get out from under their thumb. The way that I felt with them, I couldn't do it anymore. So I got a job and I paid my own rent and I was not helped. I was an adult from literally, not just legally, but from the day I turned 18, I was paying my own rent, paying my own way, working full time. I didn't go back to school till I was 23 when I could afford it. Yeah, so no, I did not have that. It's been a very convoluted journey to get me to coaching. I'm in my mid 40s. It took me 2 decades plus to get me here. And part of, again, why I'm a coach is because I think that everything that happens to us in our childhood and in early adolescence really does inform who we become as adults. And these years are so critical. And it's not to put pressure on parents and it's not to shame parents. It's really just to start to recognize one of the things that you are never asked when you get sent home from the hospital with your baby is, who do you want to be to your child? They just say, all right, here's a couple of diapers. See ya. And that's not a question I don't think a lot of parents even ask themselves. Immediately, you are just in reactive mode. You are reacting to everything that's happening with your child. You are changing diapers. You are feeding them when they're hungry. You are responding when they are crying. When they get older, there's 4 different modes that you are in as a parent, like roles. So when a baby is born, you're in a caretaking role, and you are a caretaker with children all the way up until, I would say, probably about elementary school. Then you become their educator until you become their mentor. And then you're their mentor through high school. And then you become their coach. And so then for the rest of your life, you are their coach. So there's these 4 roles, and a lot of parents have a hard time transitioning out of different roles, right? So for some parents, it may be the transition from caretaker to educator. From some parents, it's going to be the transition from educator to mentor. I actually would argue that's probably the hardest one, because this is when children move from late elementary into early adolescence and mid adolescence. This is where the overparenting can come in. This is where children start to be very stifled, because developmentally, there's so much going on with frontal lobe development. The limbic system is coming on board. This is why teens make crazy choices that parents go, why did you do that? Their pleasure center, their risk reward center is over compensating what's happening in their frontal lobe, which is where consequences, logic, reasoning are all developing. So the area that tells them what's fun, what's cool, what's awesome is over developing and outpacing the part of their brain that says, slow down, wait, there's a consequence. And we all went through that, but we forget as adults. We have to let our teens make mistakes. We have to let them fail a paper. We have to let them turn in something late. If we don't, they're going to go out into the world and they're going to be fired from a job, and the stakes are going to be much higher. But it's very difficult as a parent, and it's very difficult to know. And it's not to minimize that when parents are forgetting what their role is or not recognizing that that role has changed. Again, it's not about shame. It's about taking a step back and going, okay, who do I want to be to my child right now? And how can I support my child? And once you can get clear on what you can do and where you can have the most influence, and notice that I'm not saying power, influence, that's where you're going to see your relationship flourish, especially with teens. If you continue to assert your power, which teens know you already have, that's going to be where you lose them. And especially, I think, in those years, being that mentor is so much more important than asserting your power. They need you to say, I'm here if you need me. What do you think about this? Get to know them as humans. So much, I think, of what I also hear is my teens disrespectful. They won't do this. They don't pick up their laundry. They won't do this. They're not making their beds. They're not doing this. And I often will ask questions like, what's their favorite movie? Who's their favorite artist? Who do they love to listen to music wise? What's their favorite video game if they play games? What's their favorite sport if they play sports? And a lot of parents can't answer those questions because they don't know their children. That's not a relationship. This is a transactional situation that you are in with another human that lives in your home. And so it's no wonder then that there's struggles. And that's how I felt. I felt like I wasn't known. I wasn't understood. I was not seen. I was not understood. I was not heard. These are basic needs that every human needs to have. And when they're babies, those are naturally being met. You're being seen, heard, and understood because you are in the role of a caretaker. But when you move out of that role, the seen, heard, and understood changes from changing diapers, giving bottle feeds, those kinds of things, to what do you like to do? What is it like to be 15? How hard is it? What is lunch like? I remember what it was like for me. Tell me what it's like for you. And if they say, ugh, mom, I don't want to talk to you about it. Okay, I'm here. It's just that simple. It's not that simple, but it is that simple.
It's simple. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's simple.
No, yes, that's a good way to put it.
I love the stages and I love the descriptions so much, because something that teens really need is a mentor / coach, and some are in that zone. And so as you were talking and I was thinking about, you said that teens really need to make mistakes. And I think of the mistake that you made and how consequential it was to the relationship that you had with your parents at the time, and how prevalent that is for so many teens. And it's the challenge that we face as parents. We don't want them to make mistakes. And I think that a lot of times we're stepping in and preventing them from making those mistakes. And like you said, the consequences are going to come later, and those consequences are going to be way more impactful on their lives. So I guess then my question is, how do you help parents let their teens make mistakes? What do you say to them? Because I'll tell my teens all the time, like, mistakes are where you learn. Come work with me. Let's do some activities where it's okay to make mistakes. What do you tell parents about letting their teens make mistakes?
So my coaching is actually parent centric because it actually has nothing to do with the children. It's all about the parent. The parent actually is the one that sets the ship in motion. So if you think about any sort of leader, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Becky. I don't want to plagiarize what she says because this is the best analogy that I've ever heard for this particular situation. But if you're on an airplane and you have turbulence, and so you're sitting in the airplane and there's turbulence and it's rocking, and I don't know if you're like me, but I absolutely hate turbulence and I'm immediately like, we're all going to die. So I'm waiting for that captain to come on and say, hey guys, we're just experiencing a little bit of turbulence. I'm going to try and get us up 5,000 feet and smooth this out, right? And as soon as I hear that pilot, I'm like, oh, all right, we're good. But if that pilot were to come on and say, oh my God, we're going down, then I'm going to panic. The parent in the parent-child dynamic is the pilot. So if that parent is freaking out, escalating, yelling, no matter what they're doing, if they are not sturdy in what they're doing, that's going to signal to the child, they don't have it together, so I can't have it together. And that is what kind of nervous system regulation science has now told us in the last 30 or so years of research. We have learned so much more about how important nervous system regulation is. And so what I would tell any parent, whether the child is 6 months old or 16, is what do you believe about what you're seeing in the behavior in your child? So the first thing is you've got to get real clear about what's coming up for you in your body, because so much of what is happening in a parent-child situation has actually nothing to do with the child. It has everything to do with the past trauma of whatever that parent went through. So when we talk about generational trauma, it's going to come up. This is what I deal with my son. When I'm angry at my son, I will guarantee you that at least 50% of whatever's happening and my frustration with my child is my own trauma. It's whatever I was not allowed to do as a child is exactly what's going to trigger me in my relationship with my child. My child is allowed to actually push back on me. We have a home where he is allowed to go, nope, I don't want to put my shoes on. I don't want to go to school today. Because in my house, I was not allowed to do that. But if I haven't had ample sleep, if I'm hungry, if I'm tired, if I'm stressed, if I'm overwhelmed, and he starts pushing back too much and I get triggered, you bet your bottom dollar now I'm annoyed. That's because I was never allowed to have that. And I have to calm myself. And it doesn't mean I'm always calm. I lost my mind on him a couple weeks ago and I had to come back and repair, which is why the name of my business is the Repairent Coach, because so much of this is reparenting ourselves and repairing relationships. So yeah, so a lot of what I do actually is working with parents to become more aware of themselves and working through what they believe about behaviors that they see. I'll give you an example. My son is a little bit younger. He's not a teen yet, but we are laying the groundwork. So even when I'm working with younger kids, I promise you that if you are putting in the work with younger children, it's going to pay off in spades when they are teens, because if you have a strong, connected, emotionally attached relationship to your children when they are younger, it's going to pay off when they're teens. If you have a power dynamic or authoritarian relationship with your children when they're younger, they're not going to want to come to you when they're teens. They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel seen. And they are certainly not going to want to come to you when the stakes are higher. So that was another thing. I lied a lot as a teen. I lied all the time. There are still things that my parents don't know about my teen years because I was terrified of them, terrified of their reactions. And so if you want to know your teens, if you want to make sure they're being safe, you have to create a safe environment for them. You can't run it like a dictatorship and then expect them to come to you and be like, guess what? I drank at a party. If you're going to scream at them, ground them, do all these things that take away all of their rights and autonomy as a human being, they're just going to go drink at a party and lie to you about it. And worse, what if they get in a car and drive because they're too scared to call you? The stakes are always going to get higher, but it's always going to be the biggest thing that ever happened to your child. So when they're 2 and they come to you with something, if you're explosive, you're wiring their brain to know you're not safe in that situation. And then when that stake is higher at 16, their brain is wired. They're not safe in this situation, but now the stake is higher, but their brain is wired. They weren't safe at 2. And now unconsciously, they don't even know at 16, they are unconsciously now looking at you as an unsafe person. And so they will not even, without even consciously being aware of it, they won't come to you. So it's all being done in the brain without them even knowing that they're doing it. And this is what I experienced. And so I have a blog off of my website. And one of the very first blog posts that I wrote is called Car Crashes and Coaching. And it's a story about when I was 17 and I was in a pretty brutal car crash and I wasn't driving. I was behind the driver and I was pretty severely injured. I needed to go to the hospital and I was a minor. And I lied to the ambulance driver because I was so scared of my mom finding out. And I should have gotten medical attention. And I had a bruise that basically went from my knee to my hip and needed to be looked at. And I said, no, I'm good. And I pretended that I could walk on it and everything. They ended up calling my parents anyway because I was a minor. But the point of the blog post was, this is what will happen when your kids do not trust you as parents. And this is why relationship should really be your priority, not your power, not your authority. They already know that you are the ones in power. They don't need to be reminded of that.
It's so fascinating that you share so much of this. And I know for me, I'm resonating with everything that you're saying as a parent of teens and a coach of teens.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the kids who are very afraid in my program to take risks, even risks that are calculated and safe
Yes.
in my program because of their fear. And I was talking to a group of teens just today about when you are willing to take a risk. The reason it's a risk is because there's the potential to fail.
Yep.
And when you succeed at a risk, it feels really exciting. So it's like, how do I get to that success, but also know that there's failure? And I think it comes back to the term of your company of repair. So I'm a parent. I recognize you're speaking to me. I've made these mistakes. How do I repair? What do I do? How do I make that connection? How do I start to rebuild that relationship with my teen?
So the biggest thing is you have to be willing to take accountability and not add a but at the end of it.
Oof.
That's right. Oh, it's so hard. It is so hard, but it's a skill. So just like anything else in life, it is something that we can learn. And again, this is why this is so important to be modeling for our kids, because you are not your behavior, just like your children are not your behavior. You're a good mom. Like you're a good human. Just because you made a mistake doesn't make you bad. So when you're owning that you made a mistake, you're not saying I'm a bad mom. You're just saying I made a bad choice.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is come to your child and say, hey, I really don't like how I talked to you yesterday, or whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it. And I'm thinking that I would have felt XYZ. And I'm curious, is that how you felt? And see what they say. And that's where empathy comes in. And you just listen and you let them tell you their raw, honest truth. And you don't make excuses and you don't say, yeah, but can you see where I was coming from? And can you understand why when you did this, you caused me to do that? You just listen, because at the end of the day, you are not your mistake and they are not their mistake. But in order for them to feel seen, heard, soothed, understood, you have to eat your own crap sandwich, so to speak. And then say, wow, thank you for sharing that with me. I hear you. I love you. I want you to know that you're safe with me and that I'm going to work on that. And I want to move forward. How can we do that? How can I rebuild trust if it was broken? And work with them. That's the other thing. I think that we forget that when they're teens, like their communication skills are a lot better than a 5-year-old. So let's work with them. Let's sit down and say, hey, how can we work together through this? What can I do to rebuild that relationship? And when you're treating them with respect, they will treat you with respect. People that don't feel respected are not going to give respect. And so I think there's this other fear with parents that, like, when their teens being what they perceive to be disrespectful, then they have to meet that disrespect with power, because the fear is that they're relinquishing power by not meeting the teen with power because they were disrespectful and they need to know who I am in the house. I would actually argue that you're actually escalating it more. And this would be conflict resolution at any level. If
Yes.
you're going to be in conflict resolution at work, if you're in conflict resolution anywhere, you do not meet the conflict with more conflict. You
Hmm.
want to de-escalate. And as the parent, you are leading. You are the leader. You are the authority figure. You are the one that is the leader in the home. If you want to model how you want them to de-escalate with their partners in the future, with their friends, at work, then you need to go, hey, wow, I don't know you to be like this. What's going on? How come you're talking to me that way? They're not, quote unquote, getting away with anything. You've called them out, but it's much more disarming to hear, I'm curious, what's up? Normally, you're not like that with me. Are you upset? What's going on? Let's talk about it, buddy. Instead of, don't you dare talk to me that way.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be spoken to that way. So, another piece of it is that we really associate in this society behavior as a reflection of character, and they're
Yeah.
just not the same thing. They're not. Behavior is the reflection of an unmet need or a feeling, and it's simply a communication style. And when people, teens, kids, babies, adults do not have the vocabulary or the awareness of what's going on in their body, they assert a behavior to be seen. And if you can go, wow, I noticed that you're doing XYZ, what's going on? Automatically, that behavior is going to de escalate because you just saw them. And
Mm.
so now you can meet at some other level. I think the biggest thing with being a parent of a teen, if you do come to a fight, don't wait for your teen to come to you. I hear that a lot too. They need to apologize. They were disrespectful. You're still the adult, they're still the child. And a lot of people don't know that in terms of the prefrontal cortex, again, so this is the frontal lobe. That's again where logic, reasoning, consequences, all that stuff that starts to develop around 6, sometimes 7, depending on the child. It takes till 25 to 28 to fully develop. So those adolescent years between 13 and 18, they're only in the middle part of the development. They're literally at the midway point. So they're only halfway through where they're going to be in their whole life in terms of logic, reasoning, consequences. They may look like little adults. I know some teens that are 14 years old and they have mustaches and they're 6'4" and they're wearing shoes that are bigger than their dad. So I get that they look like adults, but they are children. And
Hmm.
so that teen asserting, quote unquote, I'm going to put it in air quotes again, disrespect, because that's just an assertion that they're upset or they're struggling with something. You're still their leader. You are still the person in their life that is modeling what it looks like to communicate. So instead of meeting that with power, you come back with curiosity and it will automatically de escalate that.
Yes, I love that you have mentioned multiple times that parents are leaders
Mhm.
because I don't think parents step into the role of parent as thinking that it's a leadership role.
Right.
When I do my info session with interested teens for my coaching program, parents are there and I want them to know that they are the most important leaders in their children's lives. The
Always will be.
most important. And I also wanted to go back to something that you said is the but. I do this activity with my teens where I have them observe apologies.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's really a fascinating thing. So the first part of the activity is listen to how you deliver apologies and makes observations of how other people give apologies, not necessarily to you, but to each other on social media, on TV. I don't know, do people even watch television shows anymore?
Yeah. Yeah.
But make those observations of what
Hmm.
apologies look like and register how it feels in different situations. And then I give them, Harriet Lerner has a list of valid apologies, what makes a good apology. And any apology that is followed by the word but is nullified. And
Yep.
so you said, in order to repair, you cannot follow what you say, your accountability, with the word but. And I think we as a society have found that word but feels safe and allows us, but in reality, it's doing us so much more harm in relationships.
You're not truly repairing. And I've done a lot of my own therapy. And I remember my therapist calling them rice grains. And so you have these little rice grains and they start to add up. And so what'll happen is those rice grains turn into a huge bag of rice. And so you have these little tiny micro resentments And those micro resentments start to add up, and then you've got a whole bag of them. I would actually argue that a lot of the things that I coach with parents, it's relationship coaching, right? So this applies to marriages, friendships. It doesn't matter. This is a relationship, just like any other relationship. And so in marriages, if you fight and then you repair and you tell your spouse, I'm really sorry I yelled at you about taking out the garbage, but if you
Mm-hmm.
would just take out the garbage every Tuesday, okay, I'm not going to accept that apology. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like you really get that I am upset that I got yelled at, but maybe I just don't want to deal with the argument anymore. But I still have this little rice grain of this like micro resentment because you didn't really see me.
Yeah.
So I might quote unquote let it go now, but that's going to come up maybe 6 months down the road in another fight.
Yeah, it is.
And you may not even be fighting about that anymore. So it's the same with a teen and a parent. It may come out 6 months, and this goes both ways, by the way. Parents get to be frustrated with their teens.
Oh, yeah.
So if teens make an agreement to do chores, let's say it's the garbage, and you notice for 2 weeks or a month, you're prompting your teen constantly and reminding them, and they're still not doing it. And that's really frustrating. Or they have chores that they're not doing, or any sort of commitments that they're not making. Guess what? You get to sit them down and say, hey, bud, you made this commitment. I'm starting to get real frustrated. And before this turns into something where I'm resentful and I'm taking it out on you or I'm fighting with you, I want to know what's going on. And if there's anything that I can do to support you, or what can we do to set you up for success so that this isn't something that we're fighting about? Because I love you, but you also have these commitments that you made to me and to the family. So what's up? Instead of, you never do this, you don't do that. Nobody wants to be talked to that. You don't talk. Most people do not speak to the spouse the way that they would speak to their child. And I find that very interesting that we give way less chances and give less benefit of the doubt often to our children and our teens than we do to our spouses.
Wow.
I find that very interesting. When they have less time on earth, they have less experience, their brains are less developed, and yet we actually expect quite a bit more from our children in terms of their behavior, their manners, their responsibilities than we do our spouses. Like spouses can come home and be nasty and have a bad day. And a lot of times we're like, they just had a bad day. We'll let it go. But if our kid comes home dysregulated off the bus, or a teen is disrespectful, man, do parents dig in on that. And it's because we are projecting all of our own stuff.
Yes, it really amplifies that message for
Mhm.
sure. Like, I'm going to forgive my friend. I'm going to forgive my husband. I'm going to forgive all of these other people, but my teen, no
Mm.
way,
Yep.
because I am seeing myself in that. And I'm seeing,
Yep.
like you said, the things I wasn't able to do, the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah. So then, Jamie, would you have the capacity to give advice to our young teens today? I've heard you give some advice for parents, but
Yeah.
what about the teen that is like Jamie? What advice would you give to that teen?
I don't even know if it's advice. The insight that I would give is that you are worthy, you are enough, and you're capable. Like I get emotional and I'm not going to cry. I am not going to cry. God, being a teen is so hard. And I just put myself right back in it. And you're loved and you're seen and you're understood by somebody out there. And you're worthy. And this too shall pass. Dude, adolescence is really hard. It's really hard. But just know that this does not last forever and that it's a season, just like anything else. And this may feel, for some teens, this feels like the absolute worst. And then there's some teens that like thrive, right? Like we have to also recognize that there are teens out there that are like, this is the best years of my life. I'm great. So I don't want to also pigeonhole all teens into this is the very hardest time of their life. But for those teens that are struggling or are trying to find their way, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I've changed my career 8 times. That's
Me
fine.
too.
You
Yeah.
don't have to have all the answers. I didn't go right to college from high school. I got a job. So I would just say, keep being you, keep being authentic. Don't be afraid to show up as who you are because the world needs you exactly as who you are. And you are worthy, no matter what anybody else tells you.
I love that. I love that insight so much. So tell me how people can connect with you. Where's the best place? And what you mentioned your blog. What would you recommend people do to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at the Repairent Coach. I also have a relatively new parenting group. It's called Peaceful Parents, Peaceful Kids on Facebook. And it's really designed for parents to be able to come and actually be a safe place. I monitor it. I am the one that looks at it. I refuse to have parents be nasty to other parents who genuinely need support. I see it all the time on other pages, and I just don't have any time for it. It's ridiculous. Parenting is literally the hardest role that we can have in life, and it never ends. And yeah, maybe some of the questions seem trivial to some other parents, but who cares? People should be able to have support. So I have that group, Peaceful Parents, Peaceful Kids. And then I also have my website where you can find out more about like my packages and working with me. And that's www.therepairentcoach.com. And it's spelled repair as in repairing a car, repairing a relationship, coach.com. So all one word, therepairentcoach.com.
That's fantastic. And all of that will be in the show notes. This
Sweet.
has been such an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and I'm grateful for the insights and the advice and the action steps. I really feel like I was able to take away some actionable items. And for those of you who are listening, I have done that with my son, my 16-year-old, and I can tell you the first time I said, I'm listening, and I repeated what I heard him say, and I asked him how he felt, his reaction was like, you really care about me? And just so knowing that just that interaction with one moment, it changed everything. And I encourage all parents to take your advice about just accept responsibility and don't add the but.
That but has no place in it. No place for buts.
So much. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.